Welcome back to the Pittsburgh Basketball Show. I'm your host, George Michalowski, PSN, and today we got a different episode. We've had about 8 guests on so far, RMU, Duquesne, Pitt players. We've got 2 NBA players have joined the show so far, a couple of recruits, Amari Evans and Jaden Taylor. Today, it's just me, just a couple minutes of me talking basketball. I put out a mailbag request on Twitter, on Facebook today, and got a couple responses back from Pitt fans with some great questions. So we're going to get right into it first. Vince Scales. Vince, always appreciate you commenting, liking, pushing out our stuff. Vince asks, first, will they make their schedule tougher about Pitt basketball? We don't have the full schedule yet. I anticipate it will be a bit tougher, but I don't think you're going to see anything dramatic. I think the takeaway that more people had last year was make it easier around the country. Like, you need to beat up on these low-level net teams early in the season and really take advantage of all those opportunities, win those, and you should be fine. If the whole conference commits to that, it'll be in great shape with an easy schedule. You don't know what the conference, what the other conference teams are doing in their non-con yet, so we're going to be on the lookout. But so far, Radford, first game of the year, about 100 spots better than last year's first game of the year in KenPom rankings. So last year was North Carolina A&T. Obviously, Bub had that triple-double. But this year, Radford, better opponent. They're a good team out of the Big South. Mississippi State, another good opponent for the ACC SEC Challenge. They ended last year in the top 40s in KenPom. Should be a nice team to play against in the ACC SEC Challenge. Should be a quad one game. So there are signs of this schedule getting tougher than last year's. VMI, Virginia Military Institute, is not going to help that. They were, I think, won 4 games last year, one of the worst teams in college basketball. But again, those games are just as important, it seems, to win by 30, to win by 40, and take advantage of that. So then you've got a matchup against either LSU, Wisconsin, or UCF down at the Greenbrier. That will be a big one for Pitt to take advantage of. Last year in the MTE, if you'll remember, they took on Florida, who, I mean, Pitt lost by 15-20, but eventual NCAA tournament team, that didn't kill their season. Pitt then beat Oregon State, who was pretty bad. I mean, nothing ever happened with Oregon State. I remember watching that game. It felt like they were the worst team Pitt played all year at the high major level. So you're hoping, right, that UCF, sorry, that, Wisconsin, that LSU have good seasons after this early season event. That's one thing that killed Pitt last year. I hate to bring it up, but the Missouri loss, right? Like, that's all everyone talked about come March. If Pitt beats Missouri, I think they're in the tournament. That's what it sounded like Lenardi said, and all these bracketologists said towards the end of last year. So take care of those, mid-level, high major games in these MTEs early season. ACC, SEC Challenge, another great opportunity, like I said. And then conference, they've got 2 shots this year at UNC, at Syracuse, at Louisville. They're playing those teams in home and away settings. So Louisville and Syracuse make a jump up. Louisville should, for sure, with year 1 under Pat Kelsey. Syracuse, UNC, if all 3 of those teams are good, it takes 1, maybe 2 away from those 3. You're looking at a solid slate. You're looking at some more quad one opportunities. So conference is going to be big for Pitt again, obviously. I mean, if they can get to 14-6 in ACC play, which Pitt was 2 years ago, 2023, with all the transfers with Hinson, JB, Nelly leading the team, I think they got a shot. They barely squeaked into the tournament that year. I think it's going to be a lot different. I think Pitt's going to have a real chance this year. If they can win 14 ACC games, deliver a couple, only a couple losses in the non-conference, I think they got a shot to make the tournament. 14 wins in ACC play. Thank you, Vince, for that question. Will they play Duquesne is another question Vince asked. I don't know the answer to that right now. Obviously, you're going to try to find out more about the potential of a new city game matchup coming back this year. I'd love to see that happen. I think especially after last year's season for Duquesne, it's specifically risky for Capel, but as a lot of college basketball fans and personalities feel, you got to take that risk. It's a rivalry game. It's something that means a lot to the city, and the basketball scene in Pittsburgh will only grow as that game continues. So I'd like to see the city game come back. Next, we have a question from Tony Tennyson. Tony, my man, great guy. Always showing love on Twitter, and one of the biggest Pitt fans out there, probably in the top 1%. I mean, he's at every game. He's talking about every game on Twitter. He's all over the place. So Tony asks, what's your best guess on how many, if any, Pitt will pick up out of Dixon, Thomas Evans, and the other young guy, I can't remember his name, the other young guard they just offered. I think he's talking about Isaiah Dennis, who recently moved into the top 50 in 2025. It's going to be tough with these guys, right? Malik Thomas, 5-star out of Pitt's backyard. Obviously, with the move to overtime elite, I don't think that helps Pitt's chances to get him. I've heard UConn and Arkansas are the leaders right now. UConn obviously took an official visit to a few weeks ago. Arkansas with John Calipari, who's been all over Malik since the start. Arkansas was supposed to host Malik for a visit a few weeks ago. He ended up, I believe he's still rescheduling that from what I've heard. Calipari was down at the draft, at the NBA draft, when that visit was initially scheduled. He didn't know if, I guess, from what I've seen, Calipari didn't know who would be in the green room or if he would be going to the draft. So that visit was scrapped. He's not visited Arkansas officially yet, but look for a visit to Arkansas in the coming weeks. The hope for Pitt, right, is that they're in the mix with the relationships they've built with him over the past few years. The hometown hero factor will always play a role in these kids' recruitments. Seems like it will with Malik too. I mean, he's been vocal about how he likes Pitt. He has great relationships with both the Capels, with the whole staff. We've probably seen him at 10, 15 games last year alone, and he's played in the Pete. He's been around this program for a while. So I don't expect him to leave Pitt out of any list. I do expect Pitt to be a player in this recruitment and to muster up enough NIL to go get Malik. But from what I have heard, Arkansas and UConn seem to be the leaders as of now. As for Evans, Amari Evans, another local kid who's playing for Overtime Elite, whenever a guy takes an official visit, they're a real target. That's how I look at it, right? You have these guys every year, they reach out to 20, 30, 40 kids in the upcoming junior class, the rising junior class, and I don't know, 5 to 10 of them maybe get an official visit, if that, per class when they're coming in their junior or their senior year. Evans is a guy who took an official visit recently. Talk to me about it. You can check it out on another episode of this show on our YouTube channel, on my Twitter account. And he loved it. I mean, he's got great relationships with the staff. They've been on him hard for a while. Started his career at Bishop Canevin in Pittsburgh, now down at Overtime Elite. So he told me he wants to decide before the end of the summer. So I think Pitt's got a really good shot there. They've obviously got some stiff competition there with other high major programs. He listed about 8 or 9 schools in that episode that I recorded with him that are also recruiting him hard. But I do think Pitt has a real good shot with Mari Evans. I'd say he's probably the guy who I think is most likely to commit to Pitt right now out of the 2025 class, the way I look at it. Another one, Isaiah Dennis, like you said, Tony, you brought him up. He will visit in August. He's scheduled to visit, take an official. He's a guy who Pitt may have gotten in on right at the perfect time. Maybe it'll still be too little too late. He's a guy who looks more unlikely to me just because he's really blown up. Not to say that Jeff Capel can't get a guy like that. Clearly has recruited unbelievably well at Pitt. He's taken the standard up a notch in terms of what kind of players Pitt can get. You look at Bub Carrington getting drafted. You look at Blake Hinson going to the league. There's a new standard in Pittsburgh for what kind of players Jeff Cable can bring in. That being said, this guy, Isaiah, he was a guy who, when Pitt offered him about a month or two ago, he was fringe top 100 recruit. And obviously the rankings aren't the biggest thing in the world. Now he's a top 50 guy on most of these recruiting sites, services. So he's got offers from Kansas, Michigan, Ohio State. He got a lot more high major offers. A lot more teams seem to be in the mix with him now. So I'd say still to be determined on Isaiah. Not exactly sure where that recruitment's headed, but it seems like it's pretty early, whereas Evans is showing more signs of slowing down, taking these visits and closing up this recruitment. He told me again he wants to close this thing up pretty soon. So that's our recruiting talk for today. Derek Dixon, another name, you can't forget about him. Another guy, visited Pitt multiple times, taken a couple unofficials, took an official this spring. He's got to be at the top of Pitt's board still. I believe Pitt's still at the top of his list with a couple other schools. He was offered by North Carolina this spring, this early summer, so that never helps when you see a blue blood like that extend an offer to a kid. But I think the relationship is there. Milan Brown's been on him since the start. Jeff Capel's been on him. The whole staff has welcomed Dixon, and he's been on campus multiple times. So keep an eye out for Dixon to potentially commit to a school. I don't know his exact timeline right now, but I think they've still got a shot. I mean, I think Pitt still has to be in the mix for Derek Dixon. We now have a question from Bob Pavlik. Apologize if I'm saying your name incorrectly, Bob. He says, I think Dunn will be the key. Damian Dunn next year. What say you? Damian Dunn's going to be a really important piece of this team, obviously, right? Like he needs to be good for Pitt, uh, to have success this year. You need to get something out of Damian Dunn. That being said, I wouldn't say he is the key. I mean, I know this is ultimate middle of summer sports talk here. We're arguing about the key and not a key. I mean, they're all important players, but I would go more so in the route of Amsal Delalich, Cam Corrin being the two keys that I see because I think Dunn, if he's not an elite guard, if he's not averaging 10 plus a game, I think you can still get away with it with the backcourt that they had that they're bringing back, Jalen Lowe and Ish Leggett. Like those guys proved that they can do it at Pitt. They can score in double digits. They can pass the ball. They can take a step back and help their teammates win and help the team win. So I think this backcourt is so stable. I think that's the word I'd use for it. Just strong and stable. Whereas Jalen Lowe, if he goes out one night and drops 8 points and 6 assists, as opposed to 20 points and 2 assists, like he can do both of those things. I think Ish Leggett can do both of those things. Damian Dunn, I think we haven't seen him in a Pitt uniform yet, but from what he showed at Temple, from what he showed at Houston in limited minutes there with a crowded backcourt, I think he's going to be just fine. I don't think there's anything to worry about hit or miss wise with Dunn, Leggett, or Lowe. I think all those guys very steady, strong, and stable. That's how I describe them. So I would say Amsal Delalich. He's a guy who hit 82 threes last year. I mean, that is so many 3-pointers for a guy his age to hit in a season. He played professional ball for 3, 4 seasons over in Europe. 82 threes is a lot. I mean, he told me on the show, you can go check out that episode on our YouTube channel, on my Twitter account. He told me that's his main skill. Like I asked him to describe his game. The first thing he brought up was shooting. And Greg Elliott hit 77 threes when he was Pitt's sniper a few years ago. Blake Hinson, obviously one of the best, probably the best 3-point shooter in program history, hit over 100. 82 is right in that mix. And for a guy to come in as a 20-year-old freshman, Amsal Delalich, with the ability, obviously it's not going to be the same exact competition level, play style, personnel on his team, people he's playing against, as it was in Europe, right? For a guy who to hit 82 threes at that level, he has to be good enough to do it at least at a similar rate at the college level, in my eyes. 40% plus shooter from downtown, 82 threes. Enough said for Amsal. And by looking at the clips that Pitt's posted of him recently, he looks like he can do a lot more than just shoot. Bub Carrington told me that the Pitt coaching staff is calling him the Bosnian Bub. So it seems like he can do a little bit of playmaking, ball handling, off the ball, and the ball action too. So Amsal seems like a real key in my eyes. Another guy, Cam Corrin. He's a guy who not a lot of people are talking about in my eyes. Um, Cam only played 21 minutes a game last year at Florida State. Like if you look at his per 40 stats, it's 17.7 points, I think, and 7 rebounds. Obviously, this guy, you're not expecting him to go 40 for Pitt this year with the depth that they have in the front court with Papa Conte, the twins, the list goes on, and Andy and Jai. But Cam's a guy who can do it. He can produce down low. He can make his own offense in the post. He can score off rebounds. He's a great putback player, solid player in transition. Like this guy playing in the pick and roll with Jalen Lowe is going to be a sight to see with all three of the guards. Damian, Ish, Jalen, even Brandon Cummings, who we'll get to in a bit. I mean, I'm just excited to watch Cam play. I think he's got a real chance to be a key factor on this team, an all ACC caliber player that not a lot of people seem to be talking about just because his numbers 9 points and 3 rebounds a game don't necessarily jump off the page. But those two are the guys that I think would probably be my key players at this point in the year. Obviously, have never seen Amsal play in a live game with my own eyes, other than the tape. So I hate to make judgments based on YouTube tape and highlights, but that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm gonna go with here in the middle of the summer. Next, we have Lucas Rosen. Do you think that Pitt will have an improved season based on their additions? I think so. I think the expectation, number one, is going to be higher. I think they're going to try to meet that expectation. I think they have the talent too, right? They've shown that they can make the NCAA tournament under Capel. barely snuck in 2 years ago. Last year, they thought they could get in. They were right on the edge. But if you talked to me last year, I think I even had it in my preseason prediction on PSN. I said, a successful season with that group last year that was really young, really unknown, would have been NIT, would have been postseason. I think that's the benchmark I had last year. Obviously, once you make an NCAA tournament, you don't want to come back down. But realistically, looking at last year's roster beforehand, I didn't think it was necessarily boom or bust. Like, hey, if they don't make the tournament, Capel's gone. Like, there's none of that talk going on right now. There was none of it last season after they missed the tournament. It's like, all right, foot on the gas now. They're going. Like, they have to make it next year. They've got to keep building on this momentum that the program has. So I think they are going to be better. I think the backcourt depth is a lot better than last year with Damian Dunn coming in with a more experienced Jalen Lowe. We didn't know what to expect out of Lowe, out of Bub last year going into the season, but now that we know that Jalen, that Ish can do it at Pitt, they can lead a team. We know how they play. Like, they're very skilled guards. Ish is going to bully you. He's going to get inside, get to his spots. Jalen, just an absolute playmaker. You saw him at the CP3 Elite Camp this past weekend with 14 other guards in college playing against RJ Davis, some of the most elite players in the country. He's in for an improved role and improved stats this year. So I think with the stability in the backcourt, I think with Amsal on the wing, if he can prove to be really anything of a spot up shooter and even a playmaker, that's a plus. Then you've got Cam Corrin down low, and don't forget about Zach Austin. These guys are like, there's several role players on this team. Zach Austin, the twins, Brandon Cummings, another guy who's a freshman. We don't really, and I don't think it's fair to put expectations on them right now, just because there's some guys on this team who are going to need the ball in their hands a lot. And you're going to have these role players coming in off the bench, Papa Conte even. I haven't even brought him up yet. He's 4-star. We were talking about him all last summer when he was coming in. Uh, all of these guys, these role players for Pitt, they're going to have a big role. Like, they're going to have a lot of responsibility to come off the bench. Maybe even Austin starting at the 4, which I probably see shaping up right now, to come in and score, to come in and defend, and to help out their teammates. So I think this year's Pitt team has a lot more options than last year. You won't have to rely on a guy like Hinson to get you 30 points, 20, 30 points a game from 30 feet away from the hoop. I do think there's a lot of shooting. It's a well-rounded shooting team. There's talent at all positions that can probably put the ball in the basket from almost out to 3-point range. That's assuming Zach Austin has a bit better year shooting the ball. Cam Corrin shoots more than, I think he shot 1-3 last year. Shoots more than 1-3 this year. But I think this team's more well-rounded. I think the expectation is going to be NCAA tournament at the least, with the hope, with inside the locker room expectation being, all right, second, third weekend, like, this team should have the talent on paper to do it, to get there, especially with the experience with Jeff Capel and his staff's experience having done it at Pitt before. Kevin Feld from Facebook. How does Papa Conte look? Kevin, I'm sorry, I cannot tell you because I haven't seen him play this summer. He was shooting around towards the end of last season. I had heard that he's been feeling pretty good this summer. Haven't seen him play, though, so I'm not going to put too much out there that I don't know. Is Cummings good enough to play meaningful minutes as a freshman, or will it take time? That's Kevin's second question. I think he's good enough. I just think there's a crowded backcourt right now. Jalen Lowe is probably going to play 26 to 33 minutes a game. Like, I don't think Pitt's going to want Jalen Lowe off the floor, especially because of his conditioning, because of his speed, and his patience. Like, he's got all the tools. We just talked about his skill set a bit back there. Ish Leggett and Damian Dunn are also going to be veteran guys that, you need veteran guards to win in March. So it's going to be tough, I think, for Brandon to carve out a role early on. But he's going to have to. Like, he's going to get opportunity in these non-conference games where Pitt's up and Pitt is playing an inferior opponent to show what he's got. And I think he's got it. I think he's got enough talent. I think he's got, enough experience at the high school level that I've seen. Whereas you can say, all right, look, this guy should be able to play on this Pitt team. It's just a matter of how many minutes he's going to actually get, how many minutes are going to be possible for him to get with all the other guard talent they have. Let's see. Kevin, what is the true expectation for the season? Just kind of answered that in the last question. I think the expectation is second, third weekend of the NCAA tournament. I mean, inside the locker room, they're not going to say that. They're going to just win one game at a time. You know how focused these locker rooms, these groups have been under Capel. They're not probably never going to say that, but I think the expectation is to go far in the NCAA tournament this year, not just to make it, not just to make the postseason like I would have said last year, but win some games in the NCAA tournament. I'd say that's my expectation. Nick James liked this comment on Facebook today. He goes, completely off the wall. Have they thought about convincing the ACC to spread conference play throughout the entire season so they can improve? So as they improve as the season progresses, like they have the last few years, they can beat non-conference opponents and get a better tournament resume / seed. I think it's a cool thing to think about. I can't tell you the answer because I don't know what the conversations look like between Pitt and the other ACC schools, between the ACC and other conferences. I don't know how all the scheduling works exactly, but I think it's interesting to think about. Like, imagine if Pitt had 3 games against 300 net teams, ranked or 3 net teams ranked in the 300s in those rankings in the middle of January. That would probably help them out, right? So, if they win those games by 30, they're jumping up. Whereas in the ACC play, sometimes it kind of feels like, all right, this is already decided by the time ACC starts. Like last year, Iowa State was the common example used. Like, all right, they already locked up their tournament berth by the time conference play started just because they beat the hell out of all these other inferior teams and rose up the net to top 10, top 20, top 30. So it would be cool to see the scheduling kind of mix up a little bit. But I don't think anything that radical is going to happen now. Kevin also said, or Nick also said, sorry, if a power conference team fades like Missouri did and one improves like Pitt did, then Pitt would have smoked them playing them in February instead of early December. Yeah, and a late season non-conference slate would rule. Like that would be absolutely awesome. The logistics behind that would be a bit tougher, I think, to plan out. I don't know how all that would exactly work. I'd pray for the director of basketball operations that do the scheduling already. I think it'd be a little bit more complicated, but I love it. I think it'd be awesome. I think it balance things out. Like you said, we wouldn't have a fluke result like that wildly throwing off the net, profoundly affecting quadrant rankings with a major error. Yeah, I agree. I mean, it should, I feel, reward the teams that are the best in March, right? And it certainly felt like Pitt was one of the 68 best teams in March last year, but didn't make the tournament, obviously, because of a lot of different reasons, but one of them being that Missouri loss that kept being recognized by the committee, by everyone who predicted the bracket. So that's all we got today for the mailbag. Thank you guys for submitting questions. If you did, thanks for tuning in. Shoot me a DM if you want to chat, talk Pitt basketball.